You know that moment when life decides you've been too comfortable lately? Well, mine chose a Tuesday morning in November to deliver the punchline I never saw coming. Picture this. Me, standing in my kitchen in my favorite bathrobe, the one with coffee stains that have become part of the pattern, watching my husband of 12 years pack his golf clubs with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. "Honey," Brad said, not even looking up from his precious titanium driver, "I'm leaving you." "Oh, and I sold the house." I blinked. Once. Twice. Waited for the just kidding that never came. "You sold our house?" I asked, my voice so calm it could have been discussing the weather. "Yeah, got a great offer. Cash buyer, we close next Friday." He finally looked up, and I swear, the man was smiling. Actually smiling. Like he'd just told me he'd won the lottery instead of announcing he'd basically made me homeless. Now I should probably mention that I'm not exactly what you'd call a dramatic person. I don't throw things. I don't scream. I don't even cry at movies. Though I did tear up once when they discontinued my favorite yogurt flavor. But standing there, watching my husband treat our marriage like a garage sale item he was eager to get rid of, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The urge to laugh. Not because it was funny. Oh no. Because it was so absurd that my brain couldn't process it any other way. "Let me get this straight," I said, setting down my coffee mug with the precision of a surgeon. "You're leaving me. You sold our house without telling me. And you're happy about it?" "Well, yeah. Sarah and I found this amazing condo downtown. 2 bedrooms, city views, granite countertops." "Sarah?" I interrupted. "Sarah from your office?" "Yeah, you know Sarah. Blonde, tall, legs for days." He said this like he was describing a new car he'd bought, not the woman he'd been cheating on me with. I nodded slowly. "Ah, yes, Sarah. The one who looks like she gets her personality from a Pinterest board titled, 'Basic but Make It Expensive.'" Brad frowned. "That's not very nice, Mel." "Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to be nice about your affair?" I took a sip of my coffee, which suddenly tasted like betrayal with a hint of vanilla creamer. "How long has this been going on?" "About 6 months," he said, zipping up his golf bag. "Look, we both know this marriage has been dead for years. We're just making it official. 6 months. 6 months. While I'd been planning our anniversary dinner, he'd been planning his exit strategy. While I'd been researching couples counselors, he'd been researching real estate lawyers. While I'd been trying to fix us, he'd been busy breaking us in ways I couldn't even imagine. "And you didn't think to, I don't know, discuss this with me first?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded when inside I felt like a snow globe someone had just shaken. "Come on, Mel. Be honest. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you looked up from your laptop long enough to notice I was even in the room?" The accusation hit like a slap, mainly because it had a kernel of truth. I had been working more. A lot more. But that was because someone had to pay for his golf memberships, his craft beer obsession, and his midlife crisis wardrobe of skinny jeans and vintage band t-shirts for bands he'd never even heard of. "You're right," I said, surprising him. "I should have paid more attention. I might have noticed you were a cheating, lying, house-selling snake sooner." His face darkened. "You know what? This is exactly why I'm leaving. You're bitter, Mel. You're bitter and sarcastic, and you make everything about you." "Oh, I make everything about me? I make everything about me?" I laughed. Actually laughed. And it was the kind of laugh that makes people take a step back. "Brad, honey, you just announced you're leaving me and sold our house in the same breath. If that's not making everything about you, I don't know what is." "Whatever. The papers are on the kitchen counter. Your lawyer can contact mine." He hefted his golf bag over his shoulder. "Sarah's picking me up in 10 minutes. "Of course she is. Wouldn't want to keep Princess Pinterest waiting." He paused at the door, and for a moment, I thought he might say something meaningful. Something that would make the last 12 years feel like they'd mattered. Instead, he said, "You should probably start looking for an apartment. The new buyers want to move in right after closing." And then he was gone. Just like that. 12 years of marriage ended with the slam of a door and the sound of rolling suitcase wheels on our hardwood floors. The floors I'd refinished myself because Brad had said hiring contractors was throwing money away. I stood in my kitchen, My kitchen, with its subway tile backsplash and the herb garden I'd planted by the window, and tried to process what had just happened. My husband had left me, for his secretary, after selling our house, without telling me. It was like a bad country song, except instead of a dog dying, it was my entire life imploding. I picked up the legal papers from the counter, scanning the official-looking documents that apparently held more power over my life than I did. Divorce papers, house sale contract, a neat little package that reduced our entire relationship to a series of signatures and dollar amounts. That's when I noticed something that made me smile for the first time in months. Something that made me realize Brad might not be as clever as he thought he was. Something that was about to turn his victory lap into a marathon of regret. You see, my dear, cheating, house-selling husband had made one tiny, insignificant, absolutely crucial mistake. But before I tell you what that was, let me paint you a picture of exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story, like most disasters, didn't start with a bang. It started with a series of small explosions I was apparently too stupid to recognize as warning signs. It all began 18 months ago when Brad started what I like to call his midlife crisis greatest hits tour. First came the gym membership he actually used, then the wardrobe makeover that made him look like he was cosplaying as a 25-year-old hipster. Finally, the sudden interest in networking events and team-building exercises that somehow always involved Sarah from accounting. Sarah, who I'd met exactly once at the company Christmas party, where she'd introduced herself by complimenting my vintage dress. It was from Target. I'd bought it 3 weeks earlier. But sure, Sarah, tell me more about vintage fashion while you're wearing a $300 bodycon dress that's doing all the work your personality can't manage. I should have known something was up when Brad started caring about thread counts. This is a man who once wore the same pair of khakis for 3 days straight because they weren't dirty, just lived in. Suddenly, he's debating Egyptian cotton versus bamboo fiber, like he's auditioning for a home goods commercial. Mel, did you know there are different weights of cotton? He'd ask, holding up sheets like they contained the secrets of the universe. No, Brad, I did not know that. Probably because I'm too busy working 60-hour weeks to research textile manufacturing, I'd reply, not looking up from my laptop. See, while Brad was discovering the finer points of luxury bedding, I was busy keeping our financial ship afloat. My freelance graphic design business had exploded, in a good way, and I was pulling in more money than I'd ever imagined possible, which meant I was also working more hours than I'd ever imagined possible. But here's the thing about success. It makes you invisible to people who aren't sharing in it. Every milestone I celebrated alone became another reason for Brad to feel disconnected from our marriage. Every client celebration I attended solo became evidence that I was choosing work over family. Never mind that we didn't have kids. Never mind that my choosing work was paying for his golf lessons and his craft beer subscription and his monthly massage appointments for his stress. The signs were all there, laid out like a breadcrumb trail to heartbreak. The mysterious phone calls he'd take in the garage, the sudden need for space in our bedroom, the way he'd developed selective hearing whenever I tried to talk about our future. We should plan a vacation, I'd suggest. Mm-hmm, he'd respond, not looking up from his phone. Maybe Italy. You've always wanted to see Rome. Yeah, sure. Or we could just set the house on fire and dance naked in the ashes. Sounds great, hun. It was like being married to a very expensive, very unresponsive piece of furniture. Furniture that occasionally asked for spending money and complained about my cooking. The cooking complaints were particularly rich, considering I'd been doing all the cooking for our entire marriage while Brad's culinary skills peaked at opening a can of beer. But suddenly, Sarah was packing him gourmet lunches with little notes. Notes. And somehow my homemade lasagna couldn't compete with whatever magic she was putting in her quinoa salads. Sarah made this incredible Buddha bowl yesterday, he'd announce, like he was reporting breaking news. That's nice, I'd reply. I made incredible mortgage payments yesterday. But the real kicker? The absolute chef's kiss of betrayal? It came 6 months ago when Brad started working late 3 nights a week. Now, I'm not a detective, but I am a woman who's been married for 12 years. I know the difference between working late and working someone else late. I confronted him about it, of course. Had the whole uncomfortable conversation while he stood in our bedroom, packing an overnight bag for another mysterious business trip. "Are you having an affair?" I asked. Because sometimes you just have to rip the Band-Aid off. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He just sighed, like I was being unreasonable for asking. "Mel, you're being paranoid." "Am I? Because you're gone 3 nights a week, you smell like unfamiliar perfume, and you've started manscaping." "Manscaping, Brad. You once told me grooming below the waist was unnatural." "People change," he said, which is possibly the most infuriating non-answer in the history of non-answers. "People change," I repeated. "Okay, well, here's a change for you. I'm not buying your bullshit anymore." That's when he deployed the classic cheater's defense. Gaslighting with a side of projection. "You know what your problem is, Mel? You don't trust me. You never have. You're always assuming the worst about everyone." "I'm not assuming anything. I'm observing. There's a difference." "No, you're being controlling and paranoid, and honestly, it's exhausting." Exhausting. I was exhausting. Me, working 60-hour weeks to keep us financially stable while he gallivanted around town with his secretary, was exhausting him. But here's what really got me. I almost believed him. For about 30 seconds, I actually wondered if I was being paranoid. If my success had made me suspicious and bitter. If maybe I was the problem in our marriage. Then I remembered that I'd found a receipt for dinner at Romano's, our anniversary restaurant, on a random Tuesday in March. A dinner for 2 that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. A dinner I definitely hadn't been invited to. When I asked about it, Brad said it was a business dinner with potential clients. "What clients?" I asked. "You don't know them? Try me. It's not important. A $200 dinner is important to me." "God, Mel, do you have to track every penny? Can't I just have a nice meal without the Spanish Inquisition?" The Spanish Inquisition. For asking about a receipt I'd found in his pocket. In our house. That I was paying for. That's when I realized I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my husband. And apparently, I was also losing my house. But here's the thing about losing everything. It's actually quite liberating. When you have nothing left to lose, you can finally stop pretending everything is fine. And I was about to stop pretending in a very big way. After Brad's dramatic exit. And really, who needs a goodbye when you can just announce you've sold someone's home like you're discussing the weather? I sat in my kitchen and did what any rational person would do. I Googled how to hide a body, and then immediately cleared my browser history because I'm not completely insane. Then I did what I actually needed to do. I called my lawyer. "Janet, it's Mel. I need you to drop everything and look at some papers Brad left me." "Oh no," Janet said, and I could hear her already reaching for her legal pad. "What did he do now?" "He left me. For his secretary. After selling our house. Without telling me." There was a pause. Then, "Are you drinking?" "Not yet, but the day is young. I'm coming over." Alpha. While I waited for Janet, who, by the way, is the kind of lawyer who wears power suits and intimidates opposing counsel just by existing, I did a little detective work of my own. You see, Brad might have thought he was clever, but he'd made one crucial error. He'd assumed I was as clueless about our finances as he was about basic human decency. I pulled up our joint accounts on my laptop. Empty. All of them. Well, not empty exactly. There was 347. 82 in our checking account, which was just enough to be insulting. He'd left me coffee money. How thoughtful. But here's what Brad didn't know. I'd been keeping a separate business account for my freelance work. An account that had grown quite substantially over the past 2 years. An account that contained enough money to make his little house-selling scheme look like a lemonade stand operation. I'd started the account because my business was booming, and I needed to separate personal and business expenses. But I'd kept it growing because, well, call it intuition. Call it a woman's sixth sense. Call it whatever you want. I'd sensed this day was coming long before Brad had apparently decided to make it official. The doorbell rang just as I was calculating exactly how much money I'd earned while Brad was busy networking with Sarah. Janet stood on my doorstep looking like she was ready to take on the Supreme Court. "Show me the papers," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I handed over the divorce documents and the house sale contract. Janet's eyes moved across the pages with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. "Oh, this is interesting," she said after a few minutes. "Interesting good or interesting bad? Interesting stupid. Did Brad handle this sale himself? I assume so. He's been very secretive about it. Well, he should have been secretive about his incompetence instead." Janet looked up at me with something that might have been admiration. "Mel, did you know that your name is still on the deed?" I blinked. "What?" "The house deed. It lists both of you as owners. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. But he sold it. He sold his half. Maybe. If the paperwork is even legal, which I'm starting to doubt." Janet was grinning now, and it was the kind of grin that made defense attorneys break out in cold sweats. "He can't sell a house he doesn't fully own without your signature." The beautiful cosmic justice of it all hit me like a freight train made of karma and served on a silver platter. I'm telling you that your husband just committed fraud, or attempted to anyway. This sale can't go through without your consent. I sat down heavily on my couch, the couch I'd bought with my own money, in my own house, that was apparently still half mine, despite Brad's best efforts to make me homeless. So what happens now? Now we call the buyer and the title company, and we explain that there's been a little miscommunication. Then we call Brad and explain that he's an idiot. Can we lead with the second one? Janet laughed. "I like the way you think. But before we made any calls, I had a more pressing question. Janet, hypothetically speaking, if someone were to discover that their husband had been hiding assets and committing fraud, what would that mean for a divorce settlement? Hypothetically, it would mean that someone might be entitled to a much larger share of the marital assets than they initially thought. Courts don't like it when people try to hide money or commit fraud during divorce proceedings. And if that same someone had been financially supporting their husband's lifestyle while he was cheating on them, that someone might be looking at alimony, possibly substantial alimony. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope, power. The kind of power that comes from realizing you're not the victim in this story. You're the plot twist. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I need to show you something." I scrolled through my photos until I found what I was looking for. Screenshots of Brad's social media posts over the past 6 months. Posts showing him at expensive restaurants, on weekend trips, at events I'd never been invited to. Posts featuring Sarah in various romantic poses, tagged with locations and dates. "He's been documenting his affair," Janet said, scrolling through the images. "And look at these expenses. Golf trips, expensive dinners, hotel stays." She looked up at me. "Mel, how much of this was paid for with joint funds?" "All of it. I have the credit card statements. He's been using marital assets to fund his affair. That's dissipation of marital property. This just keeps getting better." I felt a smile tugging at my lips. Not a happy smile, a dangerous smile. The kind of smile that meant someone was about to learn why you don't underestimate a woman who's been paying attention. "So, what you're telling me is that Brad is not only a cheater and a liar, but he's also terrible at being a cheater and a liar." "That's exactly what I'm telling you. He's left us enough evidence to bury him in court." "Good," I said, standing up and walking to the window. Outside, I could see the sold sign in our front yard. Or rather, the sign that was about to become very awkward for everyone involved. "Because I'm about to teach my dear husband a lesson about the difference between being smart and being clever." "And what's that?" "Smart people think things through. Clever people think they're smarter than everyone else." I turned back to Janet. "Brad thinks he's clever. He's about to find out how smart I really am." The first call I made was to Brad. I could hear Sarah giggling in the background when he answered, which really added that perfect touch of tackiness to the whole situation. "Mel? What's wrong? Did something happen with the house?" "Oh, something happened with the house, all right," I said, sitting at my kitchen table with Janet across from me, taking notes like she was preparing for the trial of the century. "Brad, honey, did you happen to read the deed before you sold our house?" There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did you actually look at the ownership documents before you signed them over to strangers?" "Of course I did. It's my house, too." Was your house too? Past tense. But here's the thing, and I hope you're sitting down for this. You can't sell a house you don't fully own. Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that my name is still on the deed, Brad. Joint tenancy. Which means you just attempted to sell half of my house without my permission. That's impossible. My lawyer said, your lawyer is either incompetent or you didn't give him all the information. Either way, congratulations. You've just committed fraud. I heard Sarah ask what was wrong, and Brad's muffled response of, shut up, I'm thinking. Classy till the end, that one. Mel, you're being ridiculous. We're getting divorced. The house has to be sold anyway. Oh, it can be sold. But not for the price you agreed to and not without my signature. And definitely not with the proceeds going directly to your love nest fund. What do you want? He asked, and I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. What do I want? I want you to explain to your cash buyers why they can't have their dream home. I want you to explain to Sarah why you're about to lose a lot of money. And I want you to explain to a judge why you thought it was okay to steal from your wife. I didn't steal anything. Brad, you emptied our joint accounts, sold our house without my consent, and used our credit cards to fund your affair. If that's not stealing, then I don't know what is. Janet was making frantic keep-going gestures, so I did. Oh, and about those credit card statements? The ones showing all those romantic dinners and weekend getaways with Sarah? Those are going to make very interesting exhibits in court. Along with all the social media posts documenting your affair. You've been quite the photographer, haven't you? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, how much do you want? I want what I'm legally entitled to, plus compensation for the emotional distress, plus attorney fees, plus damages for attempted fraud. That's everything. Not everything, Brad. Just most of it. I hung up before he could respond, feeling better than I had in months. Janet was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. That was beautiful, she said. But now comes the real fun. The real fun turned out to be a conference call with the buyer's agent, the title company, and Brad's lawyer, who, it turned out, was about as competent as a goldfish in a law library. Mr. Williams, the title company representative said, there seems to be some confusion about the ownership of the property. No confusion, Brad's lawyer replied. My client owns the house jointly with his wife. They're getting divorced. He's selling his half. But the sale contract is for the entire property, the buyer's agent interjected. My clients are expecting to own the whole house. Which they can't, Janet said smoothly, because Mrs. Williams hasn't consented to the sale and has no intention of doing so at the agreed-upon price. What followed was 20 minutes of the most beautiful chaos I'd ever witnessed. Brad's lawyer tried to argue that the sale was legitimate. The buyer's agent demanded to know why they were just hearing about this now. The title company explained that they couldn't possibly close without clear title, and I just sat there, sipping my coffee and watching my husband's master plan crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. The buyers, a young couple who'd apparently been saving for years to buy their first home, were understandably upset. They'd already given notice to their landlord. They'd arranged for movers. They'd picked out paint colors. I'm sorry, I told them when they called me directly, but I can't let you buy a house my husband doesn't have the right to sell. However, if you're still interested, I'd be happy to negotiate a fair price for the property. What kind of fair price? The husband asked. Well, considering the current market and the fact that this house has been significantly improved over the past 5 years, improvements I paid for, I'd say it's worth about 30% more than what my husband agreed to sell it for. There was a pause. Then the wife said, we'll think about it. They called back 2 hours later and agreed to my price. Turns out, they'd fallen in love with the house and the neighborhood, and they were willing to pay market value for it. Imagine that. The best part? Because I was the one facilitating the sale, I got to keep the entire proceeds. Well, after paying off the mortgage and giving Brad his legally required share of the equity, which, after attorney fees and the penalty for attempted fraud, amounted to about enough to buy a decent used car. Not the BMW he'd been eyeing for his post-divorce freedom ride, more like a Honda Civic with good mileage and a reliable engine. When I called to tell him the good news, he was not appreciative. "You're destroying my life," he yelled. "No, Brad. I'm just not letting you destroy mine anymore. Sarah and I need that money for our new place. Sarah can get a second job. I hear there's always demand for Pinterest consultants. This isn't over, Mel. You're right. It's not over. It's just beginning. Because tomorrow, my lawyer is filing a motion to freeze all your assets pending a full financial disclosure. And next week, we're requesting depositions from you and Sarah about the dissipation of marital property. What does that mean? It means you're going to explain to a judge exactly how you spent our money on your affair. In detail. Under oath. With Sarah sitting right there next to you." The line went dead. I imagined Brad explaining to Sarah that their romantic weekend getaways were about to become evidence in a court proceeding. I pictured them trying to figure out how to afford their dream condo on whatever was left of Brad's actual income after the divorce settlement. It was a beautiful image. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment, a gorgeous 2-bedroom loft downtown with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that Brad would have loved if he hadn't been such an idiot, reading the final divorce decree over my morning coffee. The coffee, by the way, is excellent. Ethiopian single origin, ground fresh daily, served in a mug that says, "World's okayest ex-wife." I bought it for myself as a divorce gift. Because if you can't laugh at your own tragedy, what's the point of living through it? The final tally was even better than Janet had predicted. In addition to my half of the house proceeds, I got spousal support for 2 years, plus a settlement for the dissipation of marital assets. Brad also got to pay both lawyers' fees, which was a nice touch considering his lawyer's performance was about as impressive as a soggy napkin. The best part? The judge actually laughed when Janet presented the evidence of Brad's affair. Apparently, documenting your infidelity on social media while using your wife's credit cards to pay for it is not considered discreet in legal circles. Who knew? Brad and Sarah are still together, by the way. They're living in a studio apartment across town, which is about all they can afford after Brad's new financial reality set in. I hear through mutual friends that they're working through some challenges, which I assume means they're discovering that relationships built on deception tend to have trust issues. Shocking, I know. Sarah had to get a second job to help with expenses, and Brad had to sell his golf clubs to make his spousal support payments. The irony of him having to liquidate his precious titanium driver to pay for his ex-wife's new life is not lost on me. I've started dating again, which is terrifying and exciting and occasionally hilarious. Modern dating apps are like shopping for humans on Amazon, complete with reviews and photos that may or may not represent the actual product. But at least I'm not sharing my Netflix password with someone who thinks loyalty is a customer rewards program. My business has exploded, in a good way. Turns out, when you're not constantly worried about your husband's feelings about your success, you can actually focus on being successful. I've hired 2 employees, and I'm considering opening a real office space, the kind with a conference room and a coffee machine that doesn't require a PhD in engineering to operate. Sometimes I run into Brad at the grocery store or the coffee shop. It's awkward in the way that only encounters with people who've seen you naked and then betrayed you can be, but I've developed a strategy for these encounters. I smile, wave, and remember that I'm no longer legally obligated to pretend I like him. The house sold to that young couple, and they've turned it into exactly what I'd always envisioned it could be. They sent me a photo of the renovated kitchen, and I felt something I hadn't expected: genuine happiness. Not because I missed the house, but because someone else got to love it the way it deserved to be loved. Which, coincidentally, is exactly what I've learned about myself. I've been thinking a lot about the nature of betrayal lately, not in a bitter, obsessive way, but in a philosophical, what can we learn from this disaster way? And I've come to a conclusion. Betrayal doesn't actually tell you anything about yourself. It tells you everything about the person who betrayed you. Brad didn't cheat because I worked too much. He cheated because he's the kind of person who cheats. He didn't lie because I was difficult to talk to. He lied because he's the kind of person who lies. He didn't try to steal my house because I was a bad wife. He tried to steal my house because he's the kind of person who steals. None of it was about me. All of it was about him. And that realization has been more liberating than any divorce settlement could ever be. My therapist says I'm processing the experience in a healthy way, which I think is professional speak for, you're not setting anyone on fire, so we're making progress. I've learned that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel betrayed. It's okay to laugh at the absurdity of it all. It's even okay to be grateful. Because here's the thing about rock bottom. It's an excellent foundation for building something better. I'm not the same woman who stood in her kitchen 6 months ago, trying to process her husband's casual announcement that he'd sold her life out from under her. I'm stronger, smarter, and significantly wealthier. I'm also funnier, though that might just be a defense mechanism. But most importantly, I'm free. Free from a marriage that was suffocating me. Free from a man who saw me as an obstacle to his happiness instead of a partner in creating it. In the end, family isn't just the people who share your DNA or your last name. It's the people who show up for you when everything falls apart. The people who celebrate your victories and help you survive your defeats. The people who see you at your worst and still think you're worth fighting for. Brad never saw me that way, but I finally see myself that way. And that, my friends, is the best revenge of all. The house always wins. You just have to make sure you're holding the right cards.